Well, thank you all for coming tonight, and my thanks to the City of Sydney and especially to the Sydney Peace Foundation for awarding me the Peace Prize. I would like to say again how much I cherish this honour, because it comes from where I come from. I'm a seventh-generation Australian. My great-great-grandfather landed not far from here on November the 8th, 1821. He wore leg irons, each weighing 4 pounds. His name was Francis McCarthy. He was an Irishman convicted of the crime of insurrection and uttering unlawful oaths. In October of the same year, an 18-year-old girl called Mary Palmer stood in the dock at Middlesex Jail and was sentenced to be transported to New South Wales for the term of her natural life. Her crime was stealing in order to live. Only the fact that she was pregnant saved her from the gallows. She was my great-great-grandmother. She was sent from the ship to the female factory at Parramatta, a notorious prison where every third Monday male convicts were brought for a courting day, a rather desperate measure of social engineering. Mary and Francis met this way and were married on October the 21st, 1823. Growing up in Sydney, I knew nothing about this. My mother's 8 siblings used the word stock a great deal. You either came from good stock or bad stock. It was unmentionable that we came from bad stock, that we had what was called the stain. One Christmas day, with all of her family assembled, my mother broached the subject of our criminal origins, whereupon one of my aunts almost swallowed her teeth. "Leave them dead and buried, Elsie," she said. And we did, until many years later, and my own research in Dublin and London led to a television film that revealed the full horror of our bad stock. Unfortunately, all my aunts were watching, and there was outrage. "Your son," my Aunt Vera wrote to Elsie, "your son is no better than a damn communist." She promised never to speak to us again. The Australian silence has unique features. Growing up, I would make illicit trips to La Perouse and stand on the sandhills and look at people who were said to have died off. I would gape at the children of my age who were said to be dirty and feckless. At high school, I read a textbook by the celebrated historian Russell Ward, who wrote, "We are civilized today, and they are not." They, of course, were the Aboriginal people. My real Australian education began at the end of the 1960s, when Charlie Perkins and his mother Hetty took me to the Aboriginal compound at Jay Creek in the Northern Territory. We had to smash down the gate to get in. The shock at what I saw is unforgettable. The poverty, the sickness, the despair, the quiet anger. I began to recognise and understand the Australian silence. Tonight I'd like to talk about this silence and how it affects our national life, the way we see the world, and the way we are manipulated by great power, which speaks through an invisible government of propaganda that subdues and limits our political imagination and ensures we are always at war against our first people and those seeking refuge or in someone else's country. Last July, Kevin Rudd said this, and I quote, "It's important for us all to remember here in Australia that Afghanistan has been a training ground for terrorists worldwide, a training ground also for terrorists in Southeast Asia, reminding us of the reasons that we are in the field of of combat and reaffirming our resolve to remain committed to that cause. There's not the slightest truth in that statement. It's the equivalent of John Howard's lie that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Shortly before Rudd made that statement, American planes bombed a wedding party in Afghanistan. At least 60 people were blown to bits, including the bride and groom and many children. That's the 5th wedding party attacked in our name. The Prime Minister was standing outside a church on a Sunday morning when he made his statement. No reporter challenged him. No one said the war was a fraud, that it began as an American vendetta following 9/11, in which not a single Afghan was involved. No one put it to Kevin Rudd that our perceived enemy in Afghanistan were introverted tribesmen who had no quarrel with Australia and didn't give a damn about Southeast Asia and just wanted the foreign soldiers out of their country. Above all, no one said, "Prime Minister, there is no war on terror, it's a hoax. But there is a war of terror waged by governments, including the Australian government, in our name." That wedding party, Prime Minister, was blown to bits by one of the latest smart weapons, such as the Hellfire bomb that sucks air out of the lungs in our name. During the First World War, the British Prime Minister, David Lloyd George, confided to the editor of the Manchester Guardian, "If people really knew the truth, the war would be stopped tomorrow, but of course they don't know and they can't know." What has changed? Quite a lot, actually. As people have become more aware, propaganda has become more sophisticated. One of the founders of modern propaganda was Edward Bernays, an American who believed that people in free societies could be lied to and regimented without them realizing. He invented a euphemism for propaganda: public relations, or PR. What matters, he said, is the illusion. Like Kevin Rudd's stage-managed press conferences outside his church, what matters is the illusion. The symbols of Anzac are constantly manipulated in this way: marches, medals, flags, the pain of a fallen soldier's family. Serving in the military, says the Prime Minister, is Australia's highest calling. The squalor of war, the killing of civilians, has no reference in this higher calling. What matters is the illusion. The aim is to ensure our silent complicity in a war of terror and in a massive increase in Australia's military arsenal. Long-range cruise missiles should be targeted at our neighbours, says the White Paper. The Rudd government and the Pentagon have launched a competition to build military robots, which, it is said, will do the Army's dirty work in urban combat zones. What urban combat zones? What dirty work? Silence. "I confess," wrote Lord Curzon, Viceroy of India over a century ago, "that countries are pieces on a chessboard upon which is being played out a great game for the domination of the world." Unquote. We Australians have been in the service of the great game for a very long time. Do the young people who wrap themselves in the flag at Gallipoli every April understand that only the lies have changed? That sanctifying blood sacrifice in colonial invasions is meant to prepare us for the next one? When Robert Menzies sent Australian soldiers to Vietnam in the 1960s, he described them as a training team requested by a beleaguered government in Saigon. It was a lie.